This video is to demonstrate how to integrate MediZues and Salesforce so that you can sync contacts from Salesforce across to MediZues seamlessly. The first thing you should do is you should ensure that you have all of the needed information to complete the integration. I like to put it in all one document so that I can come back and easily copy and paste. I will need my MediZues API key, as well as a data schema and a formula that we will talk about later. So we can provide those things. We'll go over them as well. Okay, so within MediZues, if I go to my account, I can grab my API key here, copy and paste that. I have this in a doc with also the name of the API key for the header, as well as a formula for my text to make sure it is in the right format, and the data schema. So first things first, within MediZues, I'm going to go to my dashboard. I'm either going to create a new folder or select an existing folder, and I am going to grab the webhook URL destination. So go ahead and copy that. I'll put that into my doc here as well. Perfect. All right. So this is the folder that I want to send data to, and this webhook is going to be how I do that. So basically, if you haven't worked with webhooks before, this is basically just a way to send data from one platform to another based off an event. So we're going to have an event in Salesforce trigger the creation of a new record in MediZues. So yeah, basically we're going to create a flow, and that flow is going to have a trigger, which could be, maybe an update to a record or something that runs on a scheduled basis. But we'll go over those scenarios in just a second as well. So once you've gathered up all of the prerequisites you're going to need, we're going to go through the actual setting this up. So not a lot you need to do within MediZues for this. We're pretty much just going to do this configuration entirely within Salesforce once you have your information you need. All right. So within Salesforce, you might be tempted to go ahead and start setting up the flow immediately, but there's going to be a few things that we need to do first. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a named credential. And this is going to be how Salesforce, how you're connected to external services and external systems. And one of the great things about this is you can set your authentication and things like that. So you can have these for a lot of different systems depending on your Salesforce plan. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new external credential. And I'm going to call this one MediZues API. And I'm going to select a custom authentication protocol. It's going to make me also put in the name, so I'm just going to use MediZues API as well, and I'm going to click Save. Cool. It's going to ask me for, now I have related name credentials or principals. First thing I want to do is create a principal. And you'll see authentication parameters here. You actually don't want to add your API key here because it will not recognize that in the header. We're going to use a custom header for that. So this principal is basically just so it can be assigned out. So this is kind of like the governance of the credential. So now I'm going to add a new custom header. I'm going to call this one MediZues API key. Okay, perfect. My value, I'm going to go back and grab my key. And I'm going to click Save. So that's a custom header. So if I had other parameters, I would put them here as well, but there's actually no other parameters we need to select. based on the MediZues documentation. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to named credentials. So I'm going to go into named credentials and I'm going to create a new named credential. So I'm going to call this one MediZues API as well. And I am going to grab that URL. And so the URL I'm going to use is the URL I want to use for a folder. So one of the things that you can do with this is you can spell out custom paths. So for example, if you had multiple folders that you were using, you could spell out custom paths for that as well. So for some of these, you might not actually want to do this whole webhook URL. You might just want to do the domain of save data here. But I'm just going to assume that we are only going to want to sync to one folder. We're just going to cover the basics. So that's what I'm going to select. URL. Make sure this is enabled for callouts, because this is going to be how we trigger our action. Going to select that external credential we already created. Don't need a certificate. Don't need any of this. We're not going to use any formulas here. So we can leave all this the same and click save. Perfect. Okay. So now we have our credentials. Let's make sure our user is able to use those credentials. So we're going to go create a new permission set. I'm going to call this MediZues API. And we are going to then click save. Once I have my new permission set, I am then going to go into external data source access, or sorry, external credential principal access. I'm going to click edit. I'm going to grab my MediZues API credential, and I'm going to click save. I am now going to go to manage assignments. I'm going to add an assignment, and I'm going to assign this to myself. It's really important that you are assigning this to the person that is going to be building the flow, so that their permissions can be invoked when they are building this. So now I have that assigned. So now that I have my external credential, my name credential, and my permission set, I can now start building my flow. So I'm going to click on New Flow here, and I'm going to select a record-triggered flow. Now, one thing to remember with any sort of call-out action is that it can only be run asynchronously. So it's not going to be immediately after a record is updated, because it's calling on an external system, so it needs to be has those dependencies that are different than, let's say, a normal record triggered flow in Salesforce. So you could also do a scheduled triggered flow if you wanted to do this on a certain time, but a lot of different ways you could configure this. So let's just go ahead and do record triggered for now. All right. So first I'm going to use my contact object, and I am going to trigger this flow when a record is created or updated. And I'm going to set some entry conditions. So I'm going to do some custom condition logic. Could also do this with a formula. I am more aligned to do this with clicks, just because it is a little bit easier, but you could definitely use a formula here too. So first I'm going to use MBI and birthday. So I'm using a custom field for MBI that I've created. That's just a standard text entry field in Salesforce, and I'm using the Salesforce standard birth date field. We're going to need to transform that birth date later on so that it is in the right format for MediZues to accept. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But both of these fields will need to be here. So if you haven't already created a field for MBI in Salesforce, that should definitely be something you do first. All right, MBI again. birth date again. So we're going to do MBI does not equal empty string. So MBI is not null. Going to do the same thing with birthday, except we're going to say operator is null, is false. And then we're going to do MBI is changed true. Birth date is changed true. And then our custom logic here is we're going to do 1 and 2 and 3 or 4. Do not forget your parentheses here. So we're going to make sure that 1 and 2 are met and that 3 or 4 is met. So this is going to trigger when a record is created or updated, and it's going to trigger as long as MBI and birthday are both filled out and one of them has changed. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is include a run asynchronously path to external system. And then you're going to click save. Okay, so we're going to call this one MediZues Salesforce folder. And this is where I might include a quick description so that I know which folder I'm sending this back to, etc. So I'm going to click save here. Cool. All right. Click X here. And then, all right. So again, add an action. Scroll down to the very bottom. You might have to scroll twice because this is at the very, very bottom. Click HTTP callout. All right. So we're going to generate an external service. Make sure to select post here because we are going to be creating a person, not getting one. And then this is where we talked about before, pathways. So hypothetically, if you had just the app/medicare.com patient save data, right? You could use a pathway here instead. And so instead of using this URL, which is static, right? If you had multiple folders, you could just have the base here. And then for every flow, you could have a different path. And then that would allow you to put them in different folders. So that's that. Don't need any query parameters, so I'm just going to click next. All right, so this is where it's going to ask you to provide a sample JSON. I have the most basic version of this possible, which is literally just date of birth and MBI. And this is just going to create those variables here too. So I'm just going to paste this. I'm going to click review. Great. String, perfect. Now I'm going to click next. I'm going to use example response. And then I'm going to paste that same thing in here right before. And I'm going to click save. Cool. Call this one create person MediZues. You're going to have to generate a lot of names, so you might want to be thinking about how you want to structure those. All right. Down here at the bottom, we need to set the request body. We're going to do this with an Apex class. So, new resource. And then available for input and output. Click done. All right, and then you can leave the advanced settings alone. So I'm gonna click done here as well. Cool. So now we need an assignment action to assign those variables. So we are going to do that. Before we do that though, we are going to solve our issue, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, how Salesforce does dates does not really jive with how MediZues accepts them, right? See, month, data, year. Salesforce actually puts the year first. So what we can do is we can actually create a formula that's specific to this flow. You could also create a formula field if you wanted to as well. I don't love that approach just because that takes up an extra field slot if you have a limited number of custom fields, and you're not really going to use it for anything else. So maybe if you're creating a lot of these and you don't want to have to repeat that, but I'm actually just going to go ahead and create a new resource here. It's going to be a formula. I'm going to call this one birthday reformatted. And we're going to make sure this is a text field, because we just want it to be the exact text that we put in here. Now, this is where I go back to the formula I've created, and I copy and paste this. So you should not have to create this from scratch. We should be able to post this somewhere, so there is a way you can just copy and paste this. But yeah, basically, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to make sure that my syntax is correct. It's valid. And basically, what this is doing is taking each individual part of the date and then just reformatting it. So I'm going to click done here. All right. So now I have my formula. So now I'm going to create another element here, and this is going to be an assignment. I'm going to call this MediZues people. And then I'm going to grab my Apex defined variables, DOB, and text. And what I'm going to do here for date of birth is I'm going to use that formula. And for MBI, I am going to use the record contact, and I'm going to find the MBI field. And then, I'm going to click save. Perfect. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to test this out. So how am I going to test this? Well, I'm going to go to my debug panel here. I'm going to run the asynchronous path. I'm going to run the flow as if a record was updated. And then I'm going to find my person here. And so let's do, actually, all right. So I'm now going to change this person's MBI, and I'm going to change this to all 7s. Cool. And I'm going to make sure everything looks good, and I'm going to click run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the interview started correctly, that it met the conditions, the assignment variables were set correctly, and I'm going to look for my outputs here. Now, here are some common outputs you could get back. you could get back the invalid date format or API key. If you've done invalid date format, you're going to want to take a look at that formula, and you're going to want to take a look at the what you're sending and make sure that is in the format spelled out in the API documentation. If one of these fields are missing, you're also going to get an error. And then if your API key is not in your header, that will also give you an error here as well. So, yeah. Once you have done this, you can go ahead and activate it. So I'm going to go back to my Edit Flow button, and I'm going to activate this. Cool. So now I have activated my flow. Go back to MediZues. I'm going to refresh the page here. And you can see now that in my folder, I have my person created with my MBI and my date of birth. That will match if I go back into Salesforce. Yep. So this is the person. So if I wanted to do another test, what I could do is I could then update the MBI again. And then let's update the birthday as well. And you can see my second test has come through as well. So yeah, that is everything. So just to recap, one, make sure you have a field for MBI and birth date within Salesforce. Two, create your external credential, create your named credential, create a permission set. Make sure there's a principal as well for that external credential. Make sure you assign that external credential to the permission set, and that you assign that permission set to the user who's building the flow. Create the flow. Make sure you have entry criteria specified, and you've thought about how you want this to work. Make sure you have your path, and then remember, if it's an external service, you'll have to do an asynchronous path. Make sure that you have your action with your HTTP callout. Make sure you have your schema set up as well. Yeah, and then make sure you test. Only other thing would be that make sure that API key when you set up that principal is there as well. So once you have it tested, you can activate the flow, and then you should be good to go. Thanks so much.